Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. Congratulations to the BIA for a fantastic brand and a fantastic vision. Thank you to the councillor for his leadership in this area. We are, in fact, talking about transformation. That's what we're talking about, transformation along Finch Avenue. And what I would like to do is put that transformation in the context of a larger framework that we're working on in the city called Complete Streets. And in part, I would like to do that because Duke Heights is leading the way. The leadership in the room, your ownership over a future that is better than what exists today, building on the assets that are already here, is a critical part of what will make this change a reality. So I'm going to walk through a few different slides talking about what Complete Streets are. A lot of this you know. It's the reason you undertook a rebranding strategy. It's the reason you are so passionate about the future of your BIA. Now, Lou talked about this idea. This is a little bit of a map of where I'm going to go. That this is becoming something different. Whereas Finch may have been in the past a road, a place to go through, the objective is in fact to redesign it in such a way that it becomes a place, a destination. And we know that as cities mature, as they urbanize, as land values increase, as we begin to focus on safety and quality of place, that we redesign our roads to become streets. And I'm going to talk a little bit about everything that is embodied in this idea of a street, because the street is the backbone to the BIA. Streets for People is the first theme area that I would like to walk through. At the end of the day, a critical key objective in our redesign is about safety. One of the challenges that we have in a city is that we're actually a winter city. And we're a winter city, even when there isn't snow outside, it's dark. And at this time of the year, it is very difficult to see. And in fact, we have a critical challenge in this city with respect to pedestrian safety. We have a lot of people using the bus on this corridor, using transit, and we know that pedestrian safety is a challenge. We also know that we can redesign the street in such a way that our streets become safe places for people. Now, if you think about it, you're not going to go out to shop or to sit in a cafe or to visit any given area if safety is a concern. So redesigning our streets with safety in mind, improving safety, is one of the first key critical objectives of designing Complete Streets. But Complete Streets are also about giving people mobility choices. We've been through a bit of an unfortunate area where we've focused primarily on designing around the car. And really, when you design only around the car, what you're really doing is limiting choice. First of all, you have to own a car to get around from place to place. And when you design around the car, it means that you really don't have a lot of other options in terms of how you can move from place to place. Complete Streets are about providing a variety of different choices to move through the city in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you'll walk, sometimes you'll cycle, sometimes you'll take transit, and of course, sometimes you'll drive when it makes the most sense to drive. But we've in fact designed many parts of our city such that you don't really have a choice. We can talk about using the bus or we can talk about cycling, but really the street is designed in such a way that it has been primarily designed for cars. So Complete Streets are about designing in such a way that we provide a whole variety of choices in terms of how we can move from place to place. Now, if anyone in this room has been to New York City, probably many of you have, throw your hand up in the air. What do you do when you get to New York City? You walk. You throw on some really comfortable shoes and you walk. You don't actually do this because New York City is a small, small place. Because if you're like me, you get to New York City and you don't think twice about walking for an hour and a half or 2 hours to get where you're going. But you walk in New York because of the way the street infrastructure has been designed, because of the interests, the way buildings have been brought up close to the edge of the street, and the variety of amenities. So we know that this is a choice that many of us make in different parts of the city, but also when we visit other cities because of the way the street infrastructure has been designed. The opportunity here is to create a complete street where walking and cycling become part of the suite of choices that we have in terms of how we get around day to day. But we also know that when we make streets for people, we have to focus on connected networks. It really doesn't do you any good if you can only do half your trip on a bike, but then the network disappears. Or if you can only do part of your trip on transit, and then the service slows down to a crawl. In order to have streets for people, we need to think about every movement system as being a part of a larger network. The transit network matters, not just a project, not just a little bit of infrastructure, but how it connects. Cycling infrastructure matters as a network, not just a little cycling lane here and there. So when we're planning streets for people, we need to focus on networks. We also want to plan our streets as places. Now, this is a very different idea from a street as a road. A street as a road is about getting from A to B. You don't really care what's in between. But when we focus on creating streets as places, we actually do care about what's in between. We're thinking about the street not as a road, but as a destination, as a place to go to in its own right. We also recognize, when we do this, that we want to respond to the local area context. When we create streets as places, we capitalize on the topography. How are we going to capitalize on the fact that we're a high point in Duke Heights? We ought to think very carefully about the implications of that in terms of placemaking and in terms of creating a destination in this area. Responding to a local context is about ensuring that the places we create are in fact distinct. When we think about streets as places, we're also concerned with environmental sustainability. Now, we have some green streets projects taking place in the city of Toronto. We do maybe 3 or 4 a year. New York City right now is rolling out 60. This is street infrastructure where we in fact collect storm water at the source. And we use that storm water in order to ensure that we have flourishing street trees, instead of just sending the street water into the sewage system. Green streets are about ensuring we're responding to the issues of flooding and responding to environmental change by adapting to the climate as it in fact changes. But we also know the streets are about supporting prosperity. Again, I'm referencing New York City because we had a speaker here from New York City and I learned so much from her. When New York City focused on pedestrianizing 60 different areas, 60 different streets, the most prominent, of course, was Times Square. One of the things they hadn't anticipated, but they measured it, so they have a real outcome. One of the things that they discovered was a massive increase in retail sales. Pedestrians are shoppers. In Times Square alone, they saw a 172% increase in retail sales in their first 3 months because they created a pedestrian environment and added more pedestrians into the community. So we recognize that streets for prosperity must be designed to support economic viability. But we also recognize that streets for prosperity are about supporting social equity. We know that streets that support social equity provide a variety of spaces and places where people can in fact interact, spaces where you are welcome to linger. We also recognize that streets for prosperity balance flexibility and cost effectiveness. Pilot projects, tactical urbanism. These are tools to create spaces in the existing infrastructure without moving a single curb cut. Adding planter boxes, adding Muskoka chairs, creating parklets in existing parking spaces, places for people to gather. These are all ways to create and support economic prosperity in our street infrastructure. Now, all of this is great talk, but it's critical that this isn't just a vision. It's critical that this is integrated into our policy frameworks at City Hall. So I'm going to walk through a few slides that show you how we have transformed our official plan policy to recognize complete streets and new ways of supporting movement as being critical to creating a prosperous, sustainable city for all. So this is straight from our official plan. And transportation planning, in fact, falls within city planning. And there's 4 key big ideas behind our transportation planning in the city. Now, the first one might seem obvious, moving people. Of course, we're going to use our infrastructure to move people. Well, we actually haven't done that. We've created streets that are about moving cars, and you actually cannot move very many people in cars. You can move a lot more people walking, cycling, and on transit. So as we mature as a city, we're shifting from planning our streets for cars to planning our streets for moving people. This means we need to redesign our infrastructure. And, you know, Finch is so blessed. I love it when I come to these really, really wide right-of-ways because there's so much you can add. You can move people really effectively by redesigning the right-of-way into a complete street. We also recognize that it's critical to use our streets for moving goods, to prioritize goods movement on our streets. There's some things that must be on our streets, and goods movement is an example of that. So in our policy framework, we recognize goods movement as critical. But we also recognize that a critical part of creating a sustainable city over the long term is about moving less. This is a big idea. This is the idea that we, in fact, need to create places where you can do a whole variety of things within walking distance, where you can go to a cafe, you can go to the doctor, you can go to the dentist, you can purchase some things that you need, all within walking distance, so that you have a multiplicity of destinations in any given area. This is about minimizing the amount that we need to travel around the city, minimizing our commute. We've had an old framework that was based on separating uses. We'll live over here, we'll work over here, we'll draw really hard lines. In fact, it's a critical part as we design the city of the future to ensure that we have mixed-use areas across the city. But we also recognize that we have employment areas that ought to be protected for employment uses because those employment uses are such a critical part of creating a diverse economy. And then lastly, we recognize in our official plan policy the importance of moving minds. We can't plan the way we did 5 years or 10 years ago. We need to plan in a different way moving forward in the future. And that's what's so exciting about Duke Heights. What's so exciting about what you're doing here is you are embracing a future-oriented vision for this BIA that will bring prosperity over the long term. We're creating this Complete Streets framework, recognizing that there's a whole variety of objectives that we can improve if we design our streets right. And we're collaborating across city divisions in order to make this policy that will guide change as we move forward in the future. We also recognize the importance of using our great vast street network, and in particular our grid, to support cycling as a form of transportation. Now, this is very different from thinking about cycling as being something that you only do on a Sunday afternoon or something that's only for bike couriers. When we recognize cycling as a form of transportation, we need to take the greatest asset that we have as our city, our grid, our existing street grid, and realign that street grid to ensure that we're accommodating cycling on that street grid. Because anyone in this room who commutes on a bike or commutes anywhere knows when you're commuting, you want to go the shortest distance between 2 points. The shortest distance between 2 points is actually using the grid. So we need to use our grid to build out protected cycling infrastructure that ensures that cycling is a real choice. I would argue that in lots of areas of our city today, cycling is not a real choice. And you know why I know that? Because I have kids. And there's areas of the city, including my commute on my bike, which I do regularly to City Hall. I really don't want my kids doing it because there's gaps in the network. And because of those gaps in the network, there's areas where it isn't safe. And it's not a reasonable choice as transportation infrastructure if there's areas of the city where it's not safe. So this policy framework is about using the grid and recognizing that our streets like Finch Avenue provide a tremendous opportunity to enhance cycling as a form of commuting in the city. So we know that we need a new approach. Now, I've talked a little bit about economic sustainability, and I've talked a little bit about environmental sustainability and social equity, but there's another reason why we need a new approach, and it's this. The boom we see in our city right now, the vast growth we see in our city is being driven by two things, and the first is this. It's being driven by eco-boomers, those between the ages of 18 and 34 who are choosing to, in fact, walk more frequently, bike more trips, and take transit as their main form of transportation. Now, what's interesting, I just learned this a few weeks ago, 16 to 34-year-olds, in fact, are the first demographic that grew up with long commutes. I actually missed it. I didn't grow up with a long commute. We were a one-car family. But in fact, this demographic grew up with long commutes. And this demographic is saying, you know what? I reject that. I'm not sitting in a car for 45 minutes every day. I'm going to live in a smaller place, and I'm going to live close to where I work because I want to walk to work, or I want to cycle to work. This is a quality of life decision. This is the reason why our downtown is growing 4 times faster than the rest of the city, because of this quality of life choice. So areas like Finch Avenue that can, in fact, build infrastructure to make walking and cycling, as well as the LRT, as well as the subway, you've got all the key ingredients here. If you, in fact, can build out that infrastructure, you, in fact, are creating the golden goose that will attract long-term growth. There's another reason, and it's this. It's the other end of the spectrum, which is, in fact, seniors. The senior population is going to grow by 60% in the next 20 years, according to our senior strategy. This is significant. That's some of us in the room here. We're going to be a part of that. And in fact, seniors also want transit-oriented, walkable communities. So there's a win-win by creating complete streets that enhance safety and livability across our demographic spectrum. So my hope in looking to Finch Avenue, and Councillor Peruzza, you've got my attention. My hope is that we can build on recent successes, and I thought I would end off by just showing you a few slides of Eglinton Avenue. Inspired, similarly, by the LRT, we are in fact transforming Eglinton into something fundamentally different than it is today. This is what it is today. It's designed 100% for cars. Not only the street right-of-way, but the uses are also designed 100% for cars. And the plan that has been approved by City Council for this corridor as a result of the LRT is in fact about transforming the corridor to densify it, to add cycling lanes, to widen sidewalks. This is what the corridor looks like today. Here's the LRT going down the center. There's going to be separated cycling lanes on each side of the street. There's going to be green infrastructure to accommodate stormwater management. There is, in fact, going to be widened sidewalk and a higher density form, a mid-rise form. The use has to build on the design of the street to have the density that will, in fact, attract that pedestrian and cycling and transit-oriented population. And this is a vision of what that corridor will look like in the future, fundamentally different from what it is today. It's about prosperity. It's about people. It's about designing the city with a long-term vision in mind. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this evening because I think you're doing something bold here in Duke Heights BIA.